Good morning or good afternoon where you are, Martin. It is bright and early here in the great state of South Carolina, where I'm calling in from, into your beautiful surrounds there of Stellenbosch. It looks like you've got an amazing setup for us to talk through today. I think as I mentioned in our little chat before we joined the call, really the purpose of today is to get to know you and get to know the wines at the Toren, get a little bit of the behind the vines story with how you produce your wines, a little bit about the terroir and the region will be nice to hear about that, and then of course how you go about creating your beautiful wines. I'll hand over to you now, just if you wouldn't mind just giving a little bit of an introduction to yourself. What is your role on the farm? And just a little bit about Martin, so that the folks watching can get a sense of who we're talking to today.
Cool. Perfect, Warren. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the subscribers and everyone tuning in. My name is Martin Fourie. I'm the winemaker here at the Toren. I've been at the Toren since 2016. So this was my 9th vintage that we did this year.
Wow.
So by now I'm basically part of the furniture, if you can say that. I've seen quite an evolution going on at the Toren. Back in 2016, we decided to start farming organically, which ultimately led to our vineyards being certified since 2019. So we did the whole intermediate process where you need to farm organically for 3 years before you get certified. So that's one of the things that the big changes that has happened over the years. And I've been part of making wine conventionally and organically, and I must say the organic side just makes a lot more sense. Especially that intermediate phase, but we'll get to it in a while. And on the other side, the Toren is based in Stellenbosch. So we basically kind of on the southwestern side of Stellenbosch, but we are facing south, which ultimately leads to us overlooking False Bay. So there's a bay with the Atlantic Ocean that basically is about 12 to 14 k's as the crow flies away. Which ultimately leads to some of our vineyards receiving beautiful summer winds that has a huge cooling effect. But once we start talking about the Edition Z, that has a massive effect on that wine. So we kind of up on top of the hill facing south, and then the other vineyard is facing west. That's actually the Fusion V vineyard.
Okay.
So the concept is the Toren. The Toren means the tower in Dutch. Which is everything to do with our winemaking philosophy. So we basically have a massive tower in the middle of our winery, which has a tank inside that tower that moves up and down. So we don't use any pumps on finished wine whatsoever. It's just our way of preserving the fruits of our labor. So pumps has definitely come a long way since the 90s, but at the moment, it's just still the most gentle way to move wine around in a cellar. So what we'll do is we basically move this tank about a story into the floor, fill it via gravity into this tank. Afterwards, this tank goes up about 3 stories. Then we reconnect the pipe at the bottom and it flows via gravity again. So we were the first 100% gravity cellar, and we're still one of the few ones remaining. This system allowed us to keep the winery basically on one level, whereas today's trends are to build a winery on a massive hill. And then as you produce it from the top, you just move your way down. But ultimately, which means there's a staircase somewhere where you have to run up and down. And you just know how it goes. You always forget something once you get to the top. So for us, nice and easy, we've got 2 buttons we just press and it moves up and down. Okay. So the Toren, we just celebrated our 25-year anniversary. So we started in 99 with the Fusion V, actually. And the concept was simple. We wanted to produce just one wine, specifically Bordeaux blend, and then Fusion V. So it was the fusion between 5 noble grape varietals, specifically Bordeaux varietals. And one thing that started happening over the years as we produced this wine is just the fact that no one could get Malbec used in the blends, specifically from the region. But for our farm, the Malbec is one of our X factors in the wine, ultimately leading up to us producing a Patronus. But I'll also mention that a bit later. Okay. And then 5 years later came the Edition Z, which is our right bank Bordeaux style, Fusion V being our left bank Bordeaux style. we kind of noticed we wanted to make just a little bit more fusion, and then we realized the Edition Z is so unique because we also planted that specific block with majority Merlot. And then it just suddenly started to have this really unique flavor fruit profile, going closer to Pomerol, being much more darker, denser, much more voluptuous palate, and then moving away from this red fruit that you usually get in the Merlot in South Africa. So then we decided, no, we're going to stick to a bit more classical Bordeaux. We're going to have our left bank Cab Sav dominated, and then we're going to make our right bank being Merlot dominated. And then also they are actually site specific. So the Edition Z is actually facing south, utilizing that cool ocean breeze. The block is planted slightly diagonal in the wind direction. I was just in town, and it's about 5 degrees measured, 5 degrees Celsius warmer in town than it is in the specific block where the Edition Z is planted. That allows us to ripen the Merlot for about 10 to 14 days longer. That causes the Merlot just to become much more richer, much more denser, and then going towards much more darker fruit. And then the second grape that we use in it is Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is adding a beautiful perfuminess and a bit more of the elegance and a beautiful, slightly drier, but much more precise tannic structure. It's just adding the feminine side of the wine. And then basically the Edition Z is planted on clay soils because Merlot and Cab Franc doesn't like to stress in the vineyards whatsoever. So we actually irrigate it much more frequently and a lot more at a time. But luckily the soil allows for the water to be retained for a much longer period of time. And,
that's an interesting point there. That's just to jump in for a second on the Merlot and the Cab Franc. The fact that because normally in the winemaking process, well, not normally, but oftentimes you talk about you actually want the vines to struggle a little bit. You want them to not have permanent access to water, and you want them to have that sort of more rough terrain for them to get through, so that you've got higher concentrated, smaller berries, flavor profile. But you're saying that's not the case with the Cab Franc and the Merlot, right? So that's
correct. So we do the what do you call it? The bit of a drought situation that we enforce, just to imply that stressful situations. But we'll only start doing that in the last 3 to 4 weeks or before harvest. That's just going to dehydrate the berries a little bit. So it's not leading up to the growth phase or anything in the flowering stages or anything to concentrate the berries. It's more towards the end. Whereas with the Fusion 5, completely opposite. Malbec, Cab Sav, and Petit Verdot loves to stress. So there we actually planted it on the western side of the farm. Completely different soil structure, which is quite amazing because we have 22 hectares and we have 15 different soil types. So just ranging between that, on the Fusion 5 side, it's much more sandier, much higher granite content. So it's extremely well drainage soils, but the granite also keeps the soil temperature a bit higher. So it also kind of grows a bit longer into the night, and it just keeps the vine also alive. So it continuously keeps the processes in the vine going. And then also the Fusion 5 is facing west towards Table Mountain. So as the sun is coming up in the east, it moves over towards the west. And because it's also on a hill on that side, it gets about 30 minutes longer sun exposure than the Edition Z. So that also just aids into that bit of a longer growth cycle every single day. Also, the afternoon sun side, which is now the western side, is also a much warmer slope. So at the end of the day, you get a lot more heat. The water evaporates much quickly and runs off at the end of the block or underneath the soil. And we then precisely just administer that perfect amount of water every single time to concentrate those grapes.
Amazing. And then obviously with the west and then the south, is it west and southwest that you're facing, the two slopes?
Yeah, it's basically south, and the other one is west.
Okay, so there's your southern facing, which is the Fusion V, right? 5.
No, that's Edition Z is south facing, so that's the colder slope. So that's called the Merlot.
And that's where you'll probably get more of the sea breezes coming in because you're facing more towards the ocean. Does that come into it or no?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. It's literally the Fusion 5 side being on the western side. It doesn't get that much affected by the wind, but mostly the sunlight that plays a big role on that side. And then also for the same, I'll mention when we get to the Malbec, it's also the western slopes that makes the Malbec so brilliant, so rich and intense.
Okay.
So
good.
Okay.
Yeah. Keep going. I'm not going to interrupt too much. Keep going on the stories. It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah. So just to touch on, okay, so that's the two wines that we mainly focus on. The wines are meant to be left and right bank, and then the other one that we produce is called the Toren Delicate. It's the French way of saying delicate. So for us, because we only produce red wine on the estate, I mean, Stellenbosch is really well known for producing Cab Sauv and a bunch of other reds. For me personally, I would never plant a white wine in Stellenbosch, just because the reds are so internationally renowned. And I mean, the quality that you're getting from Stellenbosch, you know exactly what to expect. You know you're going to get a bit more of intensity in the wines. But the Delicate is basically our take on a white wine. So we kind of made something that is light and fruit forward, which is a slightly bit more lower in tannins. We kind of manage the wines in the cellar because it's our take on white wine. We chill down the wine to about 8 to 9 degrees Celsius before serving. And once you chill down a red wine, you basically bring up the tannins. The acidity becomes much more pronounced. So once I start making the blends, I cool down all the wine, and then I start playing with the blends, just putting up a few drafts before making up the blends to taste. So it's a very interesting process just to get that balance right between tannins and acidity. So it's about 50% Malbec and about quite a high portion of Cab Franc and Cab Sauv. Certain years I put in a few barrels of Merlot, but for me personally, I try and skip the Merlot completely, just because the Merlot for me needs to go to the Edition Z. So I'm quite skimpy on that. For me, it's very sacred. So I kind of have this when blending it. You kind of want a Pinot Noir feel that you got the weightless intensity. You've got something that's fruit forward, but still has a nice backbone, so you can actually still eat a lunch with it. It's a wine that's meant you can actually sit around the pool and actually consume it during warm South African summer. That was the concept behind it. And it's also extremely good for food pairings. So it goes from anything spicy to light fish dishes even. So yeah, that's just one of those ones.
So good. So this is I'm gonna probably not get the pronunciation right. The Delicate or the Delicate. Delicate, thank you. That's obviously your. Just looking on my other screen, I've got your profile, your portfolio here. I'm just referencing some of my notes, but it's the more accessible wine, right? The Delicate, and from a price point perspective, but also from a diversity of how you can drink it. So as you say, sitting around a pool on a hot day, drinking it, or pizza on a Wednesday night, or maybe even going out for a meal and having a nice sort of a wine that'll go across different meal profiles. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Initially, it started off as something that was a bit lighter than it is in today's terms. But over the years, we just refined the style to a T, specifically having a red wine that you serve chill. And for the past, I'm not even sure, I think it's about 8 or 9 years, it has been having the Toren's name on it. We just found to have you need a wine that you can actually drink every single day, that's accessible, not just in terms of your pocket, but also the value or the quality of the wine needs to exceed the value. Right. And that's exactly what we've done in the past few years. And I think the wine is just enjoyable at any given time of the day. Even if it's a hot day, if it's a cool day, doesn't even matter what you eat. My favorite pairing is with something spicy. If you have like a curry or something, tandoori chicken, something in that direction. It has the voluptuousness and it has the beautiful acidity just to carry the food. So it's not overpowering and it's also not standing back to anything.
Amazing. Before we get onto the big guys, can you talk a little bit about, we didn't really talk too much about the Fusion 5 and the Edition Z on the pairing side of things. I'll be honest with you, I had a Fusion 5 last night and I was eating fish with it, so don't criticize me too much. But it was a swordfish, which is obviously a darker fish. It's a more compact, sort of like almost like it's almost like a red meat. But maybe you can talk a little bit about those two wines and how, you know, what's pairing like with those two before we talk about the others.
Yeah. So the beauty of it, the Merlot that we have in the Edition Z, packs a lot of punch. It has a power. To be honest, one of my blocks, block A2, is one of my favorite blocks on the farm, just because it's so, I don't want to say contradicting, but if you haven't drank proper Merlots from all over the world yet, you won't be able to identify it as a Merlot. Just because it's so heavy, it's so dense, it has huge, massive dry tannins. I actually give it medium plus toasting barrels in the cellar, just because it can handle that much new oak. Whereas usually with Merlot, you kind of have to respect the fruit, so it's very easily overpowered by new oak. But for this wine, the dry tannins and just the punch that the grapes give you, it's able to handle a lot of creamy and fatty foods. So that fatty and creaminess usually covers the tannins, and it doesn't bind to proteins from the fat, rather binds to the tannin structure, as opposed to the proteins that's in your mouth. So you don't have that massive dry perception. So for me personally, anything fatty, if you have a ribeye, if you have some kind of pasta with a lot of cream, dairy, cheese or anything in it, the Edition Z is absolutely marvelous with it, specifically because it's a slightly bit more darker fruit, so it lingers a little bit longer in your mouth, and that fattiness just works really well with that kind of flavor profile.
Very nice.
The Fusion 5, I mean, yeah, like I said, Stellenbosch Cab Sav, you can't beat it. It works well. If it doesn't matter in which region of Stellenbosch it's planted, it's phenomenal. If you look after the vineyards, everything has been done correctly. It's gonna give you the reward that you're looking for. So Fusion 5, I found it works with very big foods, but it also goes to the other side of the spectrum to something that's venison, that's quite on the leaner side. Even if you eat a fillet with it, that lower in fat, that it works superbly, just because there's a beautiful fine grain tannin. It's a very high quality tannin, but there's a lot of it. And in the same sense, the acidity is just enough to let the fruit sweetness of the wine actually break that tannin structure. So that's where the slightly leaner kind of meat cuts comes in, and also leaner foods. I mean, it's fragrant. I'm not sure. Yeah, the vintage that you had last night, can you remember?
I will
Probably.
I'll tell you in a second. I took a picture of it, but I can't remember offhand. It was 2020.
Yeah, brilliant. See, like 2020, super vintage, beautiful modern vintage. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but just the fragrance coming off the wine, once it's in your glass and it's been sitting for like 1 or 2 minutes, it starts picking up. And you'll pick up that there's something from the Cab Franc coming through. There's something from the Cab Sav that's a bit more darker fruit, a bit more heavier. And it doesn't matter what your herbs and spices kind of mixture is. There's something that's going to associate with a wine. And for me personally, I love a wine that's a bit more aromatic. Since I've been making the wine, and I think Charles is more or less the same, that we're focusing on the aromatics. Once you get the aromatics right, your palate will start falling into place naturally. While still, it's very precise, very engineered. Everything is done for a specific reason. Even on that, we have about just over 260 different components that we make up the blends with for Fusion 5, and just about 140 different components that we make up for the Edition Z. And that's even for different, that goes from different blocks that we have on the farm. So we don't necessarily farm to pick a block at one time. We actually break up the bigger blocks into smaller lots inside it. Some of our lots, it's the same variety, the same clone. The soil structure differs a little bit, but the picking dates can vary up to 2 weeks between those lots. And that's just having that precision and the capability to actually harvest in that small lots, and then making sure that every single lot that comes into the cellar has a designation where it's going to go. We'll pick a block for aromatics. We'll pick one for a bit more body and power in the blend. and then something just for a bit more palate length at the end of the taste. So you're basically building different blocks, and it's already, we know exactly which barrels, which toasting, which forest in France needs to pair with which lot.
Right.
And then also, depending on vintage, which kind of vintage it is. Is it cool vintage or hot vintage? What kind of barrels we're going to need for those specific lots. So everything has a designation to go to.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Can I ask a little bit of a technical question on those two bottles again? So you talk about left bank, right bank, Bordeaux. Just for those that may not understand the differences between those two sort of geographical profiles, can you give us a little bit about it? What is the difference between left and right bank Bordeaux blends?
Yeah. So just touching on that, I love to reference France and everything, but for us, we didn't necessarily want to mimic France or bring France here. I think South Africa has a beautiful uniqueness in a sense that we get juiciness in our wines.
Yeah.
I haven't tasted that kind of juiciness anywhere else in the world.
I agree with
that's
that.
usually my go-to how I identify a South African wine.
Yeah.
But keeping it classical, I mean, there is method behind the madness.
Mm-hmm.
So in France, there's basically a river that runs through Bordeaux. And there's actually 3 regions, but the other 3rd region isn't applicable to us. So on the left bank is basically a lot more Cab Sav dominated wines, and the right bank is much more Merlot dominated. Right bank specifically focuses on Merlot and Cab Franc most of the time. Maybe every now and then there will be Petit Verdot and not as much Malbec. And then a little bit of Cab Sav, whereas with the left bank, it's Cab Sav dominated. This can be Cab Sav, a little bit of Merlot, or Cab Franc, or Petit Verdot, or anything. It depends on the cellar and also the region, and obviously their sort out that they have. So it depends on what you like. I mean, someone who likes the left bank isn't going to necessarily like the right bank, and vice versa. It's the beauty of it. Same for the reason why we make Bordeaux blends. We use all 5. So the reason the system works because about 2 to 3 of the varietals is going to be in season. If you have a really bad or challenging season, let's say it starts to rain. It's not necessarily going to start to rain in the beginning of the season. It's going to start in the beginning or the end, or it's going to stop somewhere. So then your Merlot, Malbec, and Cab Franc might be affected in the beginning of this harvest, and then some Cab Francs, your Petit Verdot and Cab Sav will be the saving grace if it stops raining after the first half of harvest. So it's just either or, and then we can manipulate the blend from there on just to best showcase what happened in that vintage.
So you would each vintage year on year, you'll have, because of that, with those weather patterns that you just described and the climate impact, you'll have a slight variation in the percentage of the blend of the wines, right? So you wouldn't always stick with the same recipe, of course, but it would be just a variation in the percentage per each one of those varietals, right? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not going to be chalk and cheese differences, but at the end of the day, it's going to affect even if you change the blend with 5% of Cab Sav, it makes a massive impact. And luckily, we have the ability to do that. So we go through a lot of tastings. We probably do about 3 tastings for the board. Or for a panel of people of about 12 people. And after about the 3rd tasting, there will be at least 30 blends that we made up. And by the 3rd tasting, there's usually one wine that's head and shoulders above the rest. All tasted blind, of course. But the system works. I think it's very nice to get a group of people involved rather than just 1 or 2 people deciding the finished blend.
Nice. Very nice. Should we talk about your 3 big guys?
Yes.
The ones on the right hand of my screen, which is on your left hand side.
Yeah. I'm sure you got the beautiful pictures to showcase the views. But all 3 of these wines are basically engineered wines. There's every single aspect of this has been thought over and over and over again. There's a few reasons why we produce these wines. One of them is there's no limits in terms of what grapes we can use, what barrels, what the amount of labor, any winemaking technique that we can use, anything that we can think of, anything that the literature says, any kinds of research we'll basically apply to these wines to try and make the best possible wine that we can. There is a reason for it. It's to showcase what we can do. And then the second reason is to ask the question, what is working on these wines that we can transfer over to Fusion V, Edition Z, and Delicate? There is a few things that happened, but just to give you some background, these wines is a vineyard selection first of all. So it's myself and Charles, the cellar master. He's been here since 2009, but I'll get to that in just a moment. These wines were, the concept is basically, it's from the best plots on the farm that we have. And what we'll do is Charles and myself will go through the vineyards, select the best naturally balanced in terms of its aesthetics and also where we know it works. Then later in the season, we'll crop back all those vineyards that we selected. So instead of growing 16 to 18 bunches per vine as the Fusion V and Edition Z, which we already halve the crop to get to 16 to 18, but for these, we only grow about 4 to 8 grape bunches per vine. Initially, when I started working with this, it looked bad. You have the most beautiful, opulent, perfectly balanced vine, and then there's 4 bunches on it. It's literally like two on the one arm, 2 on the other arm, and it's just couldn't believe it. But the amount of concentration that you reach from that. And then we'll do a final check closer to harvest. We'll walk through the vineyard, start tasting the berries, and then we'll make a decision which vine is actually selected, which one is not. So we won't even select a whole designated area. So as we're walking through the vineyards, we'll be like, okay, cool, this one's in, this one's in, this one's out, this one's out. So it's literally nitpicking every single vine that we're using. Then it comes to the cellar. We hand sort everything extremely slow. It takes us about 4 hours to do about 800 kilograms of grapes. 800 kilograms of grapes is going to yield about 3 barrels of wine at the end of the day.
Wow.
So then what we do is we then ferment it inside the barrels. So we have a window that we designed that I'll drill a hole into a barrel, throw the grapes into there, and then I'll ferment it. First of all, at about 5 degrees Celsius, so it stops the fermentation. So it's just a bit more of a cold soak. And then I'll start the fermentation process naturally. I'll ferment about 15% of the sugars naturally, and then I'll inoculate it with the cultivated yeast because it's a very nitty-gritty kind of fermentation. It's very challenging. So then what I'll do is I'll roll the barrels every 2 to 3 hours to get the extraction going and to extract all the good stuff. And then after fermentation, I leave the wine on the skins for anything from 45 to about 60 days. Which is a super risky fermentation technique. Your yeast basically, while it's fermenting, it protects the wine from spoilage bacteria, spoilage yeast, and oxidation. So after fermentation, there's no protection whatsoever. So you literally just have to leave it. It's an artwork to do nothing. Trust me, in the winemaking, it's literally you want to do something. It feels that you need to do something. But then also on the other side, you can't taste the barrel every single day. Otherwise, you're going to be the one introducing something funky in there.
Right.
So usually when I get to about day 50, I can't sleep anymore. It's literally I'm more at the cellar than anything else during that time. Not because I want to, just because the stress is getting to you. And then from there on, it gets pressed, and then we barrel age it for anything from 20 to 24 months. Just stays depending when we feel it's ready.
Wow, that's a labor of love for sure. I mean that as you say, the art of patience in those 45 to 50 days must be. I don't know. It must be really tough to not interfere in that process.
It's challenging. I mean, it's you feel you need to do something. Obviously, it's coming closer to the end of harvest. So it's one of the last grapes to be pressed in the cellar. So it's just like you've been super busy the whole harvest, up and down. You've been doing anything from 18 to 25 kilometers per day, walking and everything. And now suddenly you have to start and wait for barrels. So the name of the game is integration. So we use the barrels that it's going to age into ferment in. So you get from the moment that it's still juice, hasn't been fermenting, you get the integration of the barrel and the oak to really start adding length and the volume, and the oak just basically uplifts the wine at the end of the day. So just to mention, Book 17 is another Bordeaux blend. So that's That's the nitty gritty, picked from specific lots between Fusion 5 and Edition Z. It's about 60% Cab Sav, 20% Malbec, 20% Cab Franc. So still Bordeaux blend. We just use 3 of them. The Black Lion is 100% Shiraz. As you know, probably Shiraz in South Africa is absolutely phenomenal. Our climate works with it. Our soil types works with it. So majority of it does come from the Swartland. So we farm the 2 blocks ourselves. Just a method of getting off the farm as winemakers, working with a different terroir, just expanding your knowledge and seeing that there is actually life outside of your farm. And then the majority from the Swartland, it's known for that power, richness, intensity. And then we get another block from Helderberg, which is just also looking at this South False Bay ocean body. So it also gets the cool ocean breeze, which leads it to be much more aromatic, that typical spicy Shiraz. And then we blend those 2 regions together. Also about 20 months barrel aged. And then the final wine is Patronus. We released that one in the first vintage was 2020. It's one of our favorites. I mean, Malbec is the driving force. That's the X factor in Fusion 5. It's aromatic, it's purple fruit, it's purple spice. It has a beautiful sweetness to it. And our owner is Cedric Streri, and he has some ties in Argentina. He knows Argentinian Malbec very well. And once he tasted the Malbec as a single cultivar, he's like, no, guys, we will have to absolutely produce a single varietal Malbec.
And that's from the estate, is it, Martin? Or is that's estate grapes that you're using in the Malbec?
Yeah. So what makes it tick is just the fact that, like in the Andes in Argentina, you're basically very high up for altitude. We don't necessarily have the altitude, but the adverse effect is, first of all, huge diurnal temperature differences and really poor soil types, obviously because it's high up. For us, having 15 different soil types, we have one soil type that's literally nothing wants to grow in it. And on the other side, Malbec wants to become a tree. So we actually planted Malbec on that just to get the balance right and calm it down a little bit, bring it back to earth. That really helped just aid the Malbec. And Malbec, like I said, loves to stress, and having a really poor nutrients in the soil also just aids the Malbec to produce much more spice and a lot more bolder flavors. And then the other thing that we did is we planted everything on our western slopes facing west. So what we do is, as the sun is coming up over the Stellenbosch mountains on that side, it's basically in the shade up until like 11 o'clock in the morning. So it's has also big diurnal temperature difference. I mean, as you know, it's quite cool in the mornings. At least Cape Town cools down at night. So it can be 30, 35 degrees Celsius. And then at night, it will be nice and 20 degrees, 18 degrees Celsius. So you always want a temperature difference of just over 10 degrees Celsius, specifically for Malbec, to really aid that flavor development. So planting it on the western side. And then as the sun moves over, from 11, it literally has a massive spring. It's like exponentially within an hour, it's like heated up. So and the other
big temperature changes over from 11 onwards. Was what you're saying, from a cooler to much more. Yeah, I don't know what the scope is, but it's 10-degree or 15-degree change over.
Exactly. So it's a massive temperature difference. It's a massive spike. It's literally as soon as the sun falls onto it, it shoots up within an hour as the sun is coming up. And what we also do is we actually remove the leaves in that bunch zones, so the bunches itself is exposed to the sun. So it's in the shade, and then suddenly the sun just heats it up. And that just makes
spikes in sugar. Is that what does it do to the wine or to the grapes? That big change in temperature. What is the impact?
That is actually needed to produce a lot of phenols, specifically your tannins, your color, and with it naturally in Malbec specifically, all other red grapes as well for that matter. But that also helps development in your fruit profile and your fruit intensity, and then also the amount of tannins that you have in the wine. I mean, Malbec doesn't make sense. It's like an extremely big grape. It has a lot of juice, and it's a thin skin, but it's literally so powerful. Some of the Malbecs, I can't draw off some juice. I leave it just as is, and it's powerful enough as a component on its own.
Interesting.
So saignée is when you draw off about 15% of the juice. Then that goes to rosé or whatever. You don't use that juice just to concentrate the wine more. I do about 15 to 20% standard on all the other wines, but certain Malbecs just don't need it, and it's so weird in contrasting to a berry being that big and a thin skin, not needing to have a saignée.
Interesting. Amazing. So that's your portfolio, right? You've got the six labels, and that's very concentrated. You're a Bordeaux blend shop, although you've got the two single varietals in the Shiraz and the Malbec. But that's the Toren way, if you like, that you're really focused in on the reds and specifically Bordeaux blends, and then the two varietals, which is very it's of course it's quite contrary or contrasting to what you see in some of the other farms where they've got these like ranges, like range tiers all the way down. Some of the people I've been speaking to have got like 25 different bottles that they're showing. But what's nice about what your story is, at least when I hear it, is that you're very focused, you're very concentrated on what you believe are the best wines from that particular region, and it tends to be the reds and tends to be the Bordeaux and the two other varietals. Just before we move on to talking a bit broader, but just lastly on the tasting, the pairing on those three that we just spoke about, you want to give us any sort of hints about if I'm opening a bottle of black line, what I should be drinking it with, or the Patronus, or the other one? So can you give me a little bit of that?
To be honest, it is wine that's a bit more concentrated. It's not a little bit more concentrated. It's a lot more concentrated. But being a winemaker, making these kinds of stature wines, getting to that level, it's extremely easy to make the wines over extracted. But one thing that we need, once you taste the Delicate, the Edition Z, and the Fusion V, you'll notice there's a golden thread running through it. There's a velvety tannin structure in the first place. And so it has a juiciness to it, but still has power and a beautiful acidity and tannic structure. And that's kind of the golden thread that we wanted to have running through all the wines. Book 17 the same. We are currently selling 2022, which is a little bit young to drink now. But 2022, in a year or two, it's already going to start becoming much more creamier, and it's just going to make the tannin seem a little bit more polished. But Book 17, I mean, also same story, big steak, bit more on the fattier side. If you want to, I'd never suggest this for other wine, but Book 17 is one of those wines where you can sit and just smoke a cigar. It has the concentration, it has the length, just to handle smoke actually. I know there's a lot of cigar smokers out there. I didn't know it's such a big community, and that's the one wine where I'll actually enjoy that with a cigar.
Nice.
The Black Lion is it isn't Shiraz style like we usually have in South Africa. It's much more concentrated Shiraz. South Africa used to produce about 10 years ago. So it's extracted, it's intense. The aromatics, it's just popping out of the glass. It's a beautiful oaky integration with the fruit of the wine. So there again, you can just go for steak and anything dairy, anything cheese. But as you know, Shiraz for me personally, has a beautiful, unique tannic structure. It's kind of up there with Merlot. The tannic structure of Shiraz kind of goes and sits in the middle of your tongue. So it's something it's perceived as a lot more juicy and a lot more length. So that's kind of something that you can drink at the end of dinner, and also just something that with also leaner kinds of foods. The juiciness of it just coats that leanness of the food. Patronus is sorry.
No, I was just saying that sounds amazing.
Yeah, Patronus has a wow factor to it. Unless you've drank like some of the best Argentinian Malbecs, this is kind of what we after. That's what we want. We want something that's showing the Malbec as a berry, as a wine. It's beautiful, purple, fruit driven. So there's one or two flavors that I always look for. The one thing is cola tonic. That for me screams Malbec. And the other one on the palate that I always want as well is tart currant. So it's kind of when you bite into that berry, you want a bit of a currant acidity running through your palate. Just the reason is Malbec ages sweet. So once you get the sweetness going with it, the beautiful acidity, if you get that to meet in the middle, there's absolutely magic. The wine is super aromatic, like I said, spicy, purple fruit, really nice length to the wine. It's probably not as big as the other two wines, but it's beautifully balanced. The length of it is really nice. And for me personally, I've done this before. I've done this a few times. Is if you braai or barbecue picanha, it needs to have that burnt character on the fat, and with that, you can't get a better pairing than that.
Amazing. I know it's difficult to choose between your children, but if I had to buy one of those bottles and only one of those bottles, what would you say is the essence of the Toren? The one bottle that really represents the farm the best?
That's going to be Book 17. It's something that we pride ourselves in. The other two as well. It's quite a difficult. Like I said, Patronus has a wow factor.
Yeah,
I love Shiraz. Shiraz is something that I drink on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But Book 17, I think, is just something that is classical Bordeaux. It's a slightly bit more concentrated than the Fusion V.
Yeah.
All three of these wines are meant for aging. But like the Book 17, should be able to age up to 30 to 40 years easily. It has the concentration. It has the right components in it. The acidity is perfect. We haven't spared any detail whatsoever.
And the way you describe the process of how you've created that wine is just, as I say, it sounds like a labor of love, where you actually go through this really, hands-on, very manual process, and then the waiting of the 45 to 50 days, which is tough, but amazing. So Martin, can we zoom out a little bit and just talk a little bit about where you're sitting right now? What I mean by that is just, can you give us a little bit of a description of the estate for people that haven't been there and people that may want to go and visit at some point, just to get a sense of where you're at, what's at the estate, is there a little bit of a history we should know about? Are there people on the estate that we should be thinking about when we think of the Toren?
Yeah, so one of the things is we cater for people who are really into their wines. We only recently meaning 2021, we revamped our manor house to be open for the public for walking tastings. So we still cater for that. We still do, and then we do quite a lot of focused vineyard and cellar tours, after which we can taste the wines. Each one of us gets a day once a week. So my days are on Wednesdays. So if anyone's in the area, so it's just a curated tasting of describing on how we make the wine, how we grow the vineyards, just giving people a little bit more knowledge and a bit more accessibility to how wines are actually put together. Just taking out the fuss and the what's the word? Just the overall that scary situation, the intimidation is the word of the wine industry. Just getting to know that there's actually a lot of thought and creativity going into the wine. And then after that, we taste the wines. So you can either taste 3 of the wines or all 6 of the wines, which most of the people, I don't think anyone just comes in to taste just the 3. So it's available. I'm sitting in our boardroom, the boardroom facilities that we have that we actually do rent out for the day. We have quite a lot of corporate functions that's happening. So a lot of people from the area gets their staff from overseas, and they don't necessarily have the facilities to accommodate for meetings. So we actually can we accommodate for breakfast and lunches, and even we can organize dinner depending on what you want. We have 5 chefs to choose from, so just depending on your needs and how many people and what you want. And then otherwise, the other side is beautiful, overlooking False Bay, overlooking Table Mountain in the west, and then in the east is the beautiful Stellenbosch Mountains. The boardroom, it's actually a pity that you can't see it. I couldn't get the camera to go onto live view, but over there, you can actually see it's a beautiful wine selection there.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I can see a bit of that. Very nice.
Yeah, and then one other thing, so the people who has ever made the wine, it's basically out of what makes the Toren tick so well. All 3 winemakers that the Toren ever had is still on the farm. You know that song, Hotel California?
I know it well, yes.
Yeah, I think it's the last verse where they say, like, you can check out, but you can never really leave.
Yes.
So Albie Koch, who's the managing director and part owner, the same with Charles. Albie Koch, he's the MD. He was the first winemaker in '99. He was about 23 years old when he made the first bottle of Fusion V. Charles Williams then took over from him in 2009, and I took over from Charles Williams in 2019. Charles Williams is now cellar master. He oversees that I don't spend too much money. He's a bit more precise in the vineyard. That's where his passion is. My passion is a bit more winemaking per se, very much more barrel aging, fermentation techniques, and so on. So we have a complete team of all three winemakers that ever existed is still on the farm. So you kind of have this backstop to go to Albie and ask him, like, what was the thought process? Why did you plant a block like this? What did you find? Or even if you're looking for a pipe underneath one of the vineyards, like you have to go and ask Albie, where was that pipe? And he'll definitely tell you that's where it is. It can go both ways. If something worked how they planted the vineyard, if it didn't work, so then we can ask the question to improve it or keep it the same. As we're going into a stage of where we're going to start replanting soon, we kind of can get together, ask the questions. And at the end of the day, I mean, we're working with vineyards that's now about, the average age is just over close to 25 years at the moment. We've got some vineyards that's about 27, 28, and other ones that's about 17, 18, which is just a prime time to make next level wines. At this stage, we get 3 different palates. Albie is slightly older, Charles is a bit older than I am, and I'm a bit younger. So getting a good balance between 3 different generations. I mean, people from the 90s, who drank wines in the 90s and everything, love big, massive, oaky, intense wines. Whereas I think Charles' generation started to become a little bit more elegant, whereas my generation is a bit more about the finesse and the overall fruit balance, and also, but still keeping the oakiness to the wine. So getting something in between those 3, we end up with a brilliant product.
I love that. That just really talks about, in corporate land, you talk about intellectual property, which is really around the idea that you have this memory of across the team going back, which then comes together really nicely to be able to produce what you guys produce. Which sounds amazing. That sounds amazing. And then what was there before? Because it sounds like it's a relatively new. I mean, compared to the other farms in the region. I mean, what was the Toren before it was the Toren? Just
to be honest, there was a really tiny block of Chardonnay at the entrance, but that was all sold to the co-op. The rest was virgin land, and back in the day when we started to look into producing wines and looking at soil profiles, planning on what to plant on these lands. At the same time, the neighbor asked the previous owner if he wanted to possibly buy the building from him. That's where the cellar is now, and that was literally everything just started falling into place. It was like, the analysis on the soils were done. They started to plant, and literally a year after, the neighbor asked if he wanted the building, and that's just how everything started to fall into place. So it was virgin ground mostly.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I think I mentioned to you before we jumped on the recorded conversation that I left South Africa about 17 years ago. So some of the estates like yours, I don't even know that well, because you were just starting to come into being, and now matured, as you said. The wines are at a really good age as well, and the wines are coming through in a really good way. So just good to see that, almost that next generation of, it's not the legacy Constantias and the Vergeligens and the Marathis. It's more, you coming through as a next generation estate, which is awesome to see.
It's for me personally, it doesn't matter what you do in life. Consistency is key. As long as it's just keeping on moving up, the dumps can be little, but as long as it's just a constant running through the whole thing, it really works well.
Amazing. So as we close our conversations, I always like to ask a little bit of a behind the lines. Is there anything interesting you can share with us that is not found on the internet necessarily, that's not found in a brochure, that's not found on the back of the bottle on the label? You've already given us a lot of information, but is there anything in closing, last thoughts that you would like to share before we say goodbye?
Yeah, that was the fact that we all 3 winemakers are still on the farm.
Okay, cool.
I think that's the beauty of it. Me personally, and then everyone has their own creativity,
Yeah.
own freedom to do what they want to. I think that's also the fun part of it. It's our way of just expressing ourselves.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Martin. Martin Fourie, winemaker at the Toren. I really appreciate your time. We will be sharing this amazing information with our club, and I hope to see you down there in Stellenbosch in the not too distant future.
Yeah,
The time.
Just come during summer. The winters are getting long now. Thanks,
Warren.
Warren.
We'll speak soon.
Perfect. Cheers.
Bye-bye.